Hello, welcome to the second presentation about the INTERsoft-INTELLICAD 2022 program. Today I'll discuss entering and drawing with CAD elements and editing these elements. First, I'll change the background because it will be better to view and it will be easier to see what is being saved if the screen is white. In my opinion, it's better to work on a black program in the background, but when it comes to recording a movie and then watching it in different resolutions, it'll be much better to show it on a light background. The first thing you have probably noticed about the program is the grid. Ta-da! The grid can help you draw because it can be your modular mesh. If the grid snap is turned on at the bottom of the status bar, then the cursor will stick to this grid, and this grid will be an auxiliary element for drawing. Setting up the grid, turning on and off, is done in the status bar right here at the bottom, as well as under the right button. If you choose the settings, you'll be able to set the size of this grid, and not necessarily horizontally and vertically, but at the same interval. I'm not going to use the grid today, so I'll turn it off in the drawing. When it comes to starting work in INTERsoft-INTELLICAD, it is very important that you draw everything on a 1:1 scale. You do not convert it to a scale of 1:500, 1:50, 2:1. You draw everything in the scale of 1:1, and then only when you print it will you determine the scale in which you will print it. You draw in the model area. Here at the bottom, you'll find the model tab. You also have layout tabs, but I'll discuss layout printing in another presentation. Today, however, I will tell you about drawing. I will close my palette and I will add elements that may be useful in a moment. Let me start by saying that I should divide the drawing into layers. You can do it at any time. You can do it before you start drawing. You can do it after. I'll start drawing without layers. I'll be drawing on layer 0. Switching between layers is on both the quick launch bar and start ribbon, depending on what you have at your disposal. I choose the line drawing option. In the previous video, I showed the basic options of data entry by using the input window next to the cursor. This window was turned on automatically when the drawing option was activated. You can draw in several ways. You can enter absolute coordinates in the Cartesian coordinate system, that is x and y. You can enter relative coordinates, that is from the point where you last drew. And you can enter relatively but polarly, that is adding, for example, lengths and angles, not just x and y. If you have this box at the cursor enabled, input is relative. So you do not enter absolute coordinates from point 0, 0, which is denoted by default in the lower left corner here, but from the point where you click. If you wanted to start drawing as absolute, you have to turn this box off, which I'm doing now. So here at the bottom, in the status bar, I'll turn dynamic input off. And I'll introduce the first line in such a way so it will start from point 0, point 0. So I type 0, 0 on the keyboard. The comma is the separator between x and y. The period is the value separator. So for example, 12, and then half of it will be 12.5. Remember that the period on the numeric pad is actually a comma, so keep this in mind when entering data. I start to draw at point 0, 0, and now if I would like to enter absolute coordinates, of course remember that x is horizontal and y is vertical. For example, 200 units to the right, it will be 200.0 because in y I will be drawing horizontally. I confirm with enter, and I only enter data from the keyboard. Now, when I would like to go in absolute up, let's say by drawing a rectangle, then I would give it the y value, which I previously set at 200. The number of units up, let's say 500, and confirm it with enter. And I can draw a whole rectangle this way. So now there will be 0 in x, and there will be 500 in y. Now I will close my outline with an option, which is at the bottom in the command area. Either I click on it or write the letter C. Or I will give the coordinates 0, 0. If I close it by clicking C and approve via enter, the program will close my outline, but it will also come out immediately from this option. If I only type coordinates, of course, after approval, I still have to exit the option with the right mouse button, enter or escape. If you do not turn off the dynamic entry window when you start drawing from any point, you have to remember that it is relative drawing. And if I draw exactly the same rectangle before entering the value, I have to enter the eta sign or the at sign, and then enter exactly the same first values that were in the introduction of absolute coordinates. Remembering that at this moment, exactly at the place I clicked, the program introduces a temporary point 0.0 from your coordinate system. The first value is exactly the same, but now when introducing the next value, remember that you're starting with an at sign again, but now this is the beginning of the coordinate system, which means that if I draw up, for example in x, there will be no displacement. So I start with 0, the comma, the value in y, it was 500. And in this way, every time starting from the at sign, I enter the appropriate data relative to this exact point. So now again, when it comes to the horizontal element, it will be to the left, which is minus 200, comma, 0, because I'm going horizontally. And here I can also use an ending or entering the coordinates. But when entering the coordinates, remember that this is the beginning of the coordinate system. So I would have to enter 0, comma, minus 500 and confirm with enter. When you have enabled this dynamic entry window, I'll enable it at the bottom. If you would like to define your own settings, remember that all the elements under the right button here at the bottom also have on and off, but they can have access to settings so you can check and modify these settings for yourself. When you turn on such a window, the window automatically switches to relative coordinates. That is, when I now click the starting point, I can already enter data from this point. Only I no longer need to enter the at sign. I draw the same rectangle each time I enter data without the at sign. Of course, I don't have to do it with x and y coordinates. I can also, as I showed in the previous video, use these input fields at the cursor. That is, here is where I have this higher than 200 value, so I can convert it to 200, and then go to the angle with the tab from the keyboard. Please note that to the right is 0, to the top is 90, to the left is 180, and to the bottom is an angle of 270 degrees. And now in the same way, I can enter the whole rectangle. So again, 500. I switch to the angle, I enter 90. Note that when I enter data in this way, sometimes the program relatively treats the angle it is going to insert. So when you define the end after switching, always check that the setting of the angle is. Now we have such a situation that if we look at the angles non-relatively, then downwards is at 270. Whereas now you see that from this line that I last entered, this angle will be 180 degrees because I'm going to the left. Remember that the program shows angles ascending in the counterclockwise direction. And now, this is a good time to talk about the undo option. There is an undo option which you have seen just a moment ago, but this option will also work in different ways. When I finish drawing a given element, I use the undo option and the entire introduced element went back. When I start drawing and entering data and I realize that I have introduced some data incorrectly, for example, now I have introduced the wrong value, we have different ways of using the undo option. 1, there's the Control-Z option. 2, there's the undo from the arrow here at the cursor. And then there's 3, which is the undo option from the command area. Now, all of these undo options only undo the last entered element and not everything that was inserted from the time you activated the command. When you finish the command, Then using Ctrl Z or the arrow in the top left corner, we'll remove the whole entered rectangle as here. But remember that the arrow in the top left corner removes everything from the moment of command activation, both during drawing as well as after you have finished drawing an element. Now I will finish by typing the letter C, which means I finished my drawing. You can use the tab and input window to draw angles, but you don't have to, and you can select options from under the arrow. You have probably seen the angle and the length under the arrow and at the bottom of the screen. It was shown in the previous presentation, so just a reminder. Here you can choose, for example, the length. I specify the length of 200, confirm with enter, and now we enter the angle. But now please pay attention. First specify whether you're entering the length or the angle. I'll enter the length, that is the letter L, type in 500 and confirm with enter. Now for the angle. I will type 90. For a change, we will now choose the angle. I will enter 180 and the length will be 200. And now if I were to enter the angle, it would also be 90 degrees from the last entered value. But I'll just close it and another rectangle is drawn. Whether it will be a rectangle with a different angle or whether it will be parallelly perpendicular to the screen, it will all depend on your design. There is of course an easier way to draw an element. You can just turn on the Ortho mode and start drawing. This is the button to turn on Ortho here on the status bar at the bottom, or the F8 key if you prefer. And now all you have to do is show the direction, enter the value, and confirm with enter. If you do not turn on the Ortho mode, the program will follow the cursor or the distance you enter, and it will go exactly to the cursor line you point to. Now please pay attention to this situation. Even though I stopped here, even though I have Ortho turned on, the program has the snap points as a higher priority, and the program will follow them so that line will go towards the snap point shown. So please remember to place the cursor so that it does not catch any snap points. You can also introduce such drawing at an angle. You have something like tracking in the program here. Note that when I stop at some element, at some corner, for a moment, then I have the cursor, a green line appears that shows you to start drawing exactly on the same line. This line will appear only when you draw or edit something. It will only appear vertical or horizontally. You need to keep the cursor on one of the lines, and in a moment you can get this line either horizontally or vertically, depending on how you need it. But there may be times when you need a slightly smaller angle than 90 degrees. You should then go to the tracking settings here at the bottom of the screen. When you enter the drawing settings here, you will see the settings for various parts of the program. Now I will only talk about polar tracking. I switched to polar tracking, and here you can choose another angle. For example, 45 degrees. Additionally, please note that when I start drawing, of course I have to turn off Ortho. And when I approach the 45-degree angle, I stop the cursor on this line and I can type 200. And if I want to draw the same rectangle only inclined, I do not have to give angles. I just use these additional polar lines, which will allow me to draw these elements in a simple way, determining only their length. The ways of drawing, as you can see, are quite a few. We have the same rectangle drawn in different ways. Now, is this rectangle exactly the same? Not really. I used the line and polyline options while drawing. Now let's examine what a line is and what a polyline is. After the selection, if you choose the properties, they'll be useful to you now. Then you can see that this is a line. Generally in INTELLICAD, if you select any element, then the so-called handle appears on it. The handles are blue by default, but you can modify this. As for the line, these handles appear at the beginning and at the end. And in the middle, it shows us a handle that we can move the entire element with. So the beginning and the end will allow you to lengthen, or let's say curve your line. The middle handle, on the other hand, will allow you to move the entire line. I click on the middle handle, let go of the key while moving the mouse, and click elsewhere where I want the element to be moved to. Each selected simple element will have such a middle handle. A polyline on a view usually looks the same as a line, but please note how I mark it. The whole rectangle is one element, that is, it is drawn with an outline, with one outline. The polyline can be closed. Then, if you would like to create a three-dimensional element from it, you can then draw it using the option on the 3D drawing ribbon. You can assign the width of such a polyline, and you can also specify the width differently at different ends. For example, at one end, it will be a value of 1, and at the other end, there will be a 5. It will simply be an arrow. Such elements are here to be defined in this property window, here in these places. A polyline also gives you possibilities for additional distortion. You can lengthen such a rectangle, you can add a vertex, then you will change it to a polygon. You can, as well, you may have noticed, change it to an arc. So depending on what you need, the polyline can be further modified. Lines do not have such additional points. You have the possibility only to shorten it, lengthen it, and change the position of these starting and ending points. If you want to keep an angle, you have, if you use these triangles at the beginning or at the end, you can shorten or lengthen this line accordingly at the existing angle. If you grab the square handle, then unfortunately the angle will no longer be maintainable. Of course, the stretch option will give you such an opportunity, while you can simply select and lengthen the line using these for those triangles. Besides, if you were to continue drawing the documentation and use such an option as, for example, offset, then the line will behave a bit differently. And of course, your line will also behave differently, which I will show you in a moment. Before I start drawing further, I will introduce a few layers. Entering and defining layers was covered in the previous presentation, so now I'll just enter the layer and give the appropriate data. So the axes, pink color, this will be called axes. So I'll choose something not too dense, not too thin, and the thickness will be the default one, let's say 0.5. In addition, the outline layer, but in a different color, so that you can see the belongings of each element to the layer. It will definitely be elements drawn with a continuous and thicker line. I have it turned off down here in the status bar. In the status bar, there's an option to turn on and off the thickness, but I have it turned off. But if there was such a need, you can turn it on at any time. Now the layers that will be active, which means the one on which I'll be drawing. I double-clicked it. These will be the axes. So I'll move the drawing a bit now. Moving the drawing, that is pressing the mouse wheel and zooming in and out of the drawing, moving the mouse wheel towards you and away from you. Now let me draw an axis, and additionally a secondary axis perpendicular to it. Now I will put a circle on the outline layer. I will choose elements mainly from the ribbon. Some icons have small triangles next to them that represent additional options. And so in the case of the circle, you have the option of introducing it in different ways, either with a center and radius or with 2 points. It will all depend on what you will use it for. I, for now, will choose the center and radius. Now I would like to discuss some more basic elements for precise drawing. It could be the grid that I turned on here. It could be ortho drawing, because drawing ortho is very useful. But to find the intersection point where I want to start drawing, here I need to have the snap point turned on. The snap points independently select the characteristic places on the elements, whether it will be the end of the line, center of the line, or the center of the circle. So as the center point, the center of the arc, so that the length of the contour of your arc. You can turn all these elements on and off so that the program finds them. These elements are both on the ribbon, both the draw here in this part, entity snaps, and the option to set the bottom of the status bar here in the entity snap setting. And of course, you can also find the snap points under the right mouse button. The snap points have two states. Note that when you are in the command, so that you have the input window turned on next to the cursor, here at the bottom of the screen on the command bar, you also have information that you are in the process of drawing a circle. Then, if you choose anything from the set of snap points, the given points turns off all the other snap points. The ones that you have are fixed points. Now I only have the intersection point at my disposal. Please note these constant points are back on, and that one point has been turned off. Temporary snap points are turned off while drawing. During editing, this is during work. If you don't have anything turned on, you are not drawing or editing. Then you can turn on the snap points that you usually need, and they will stay on until you turn them off by yourself. As for temporary points, as you have just seen, they are only turned on when you click. This click causes them to automatically unhook, and the previous states of these snap points is turned on. I will now draw a circle with a radius of 50 units. I type 50 and confirm with enter. And now, if I want to enter another circle, I have a repeat of the options under the right key, so I can do it very easily. And now I can both use the center of the circle that shows me where I am, but note that there are other snap points visible to me as well. And it is very difficult to target the one that you would like to center of the circle that is already inserted. Very often you turn on all possible snaps, and then there is such a situation that the appropriate one does not turn on. Therefore, it would be best to disable these snap points and only use the most frequently used ones. I suggest that the nearest snap be turned off. The nearest snap point, that is the one that shows around the entire circle along the length of the line, is not a very precise snap point. But please note, if you started to draw a circle again, and I have turned off this nearest snap point, then without any problem, even without zooming in too closely to the drawing, this center point of the circle is very easy to snap to by the program. Thus, the arrangement of these snap points. It is good to check that there are not too many of these points, because then it is difficult to find the right one. Remember that when you draw, also that you can turn on the one that you need, and then the rest will be automatically turned off, and you'll be able to safely select the point that you want. Now two circles have been introduced on the same center. The other snap points that are often useful are the symmetrical point, which is the exact center of the line, or the center of the arc, for example, and this is not the center of the arc, but the center of my piece of the arc's contour. You also have an intersection here, but I have already mentioned that a perpendicular point, but remember that the perpendicular point is always the second point to your line. So you do not start from the element and draw perpendicularly. You only show the point outside the line, and it finds the perpendicular on the element. When it comes to circles, tangent snap points, so the program will automatically find the point that is appropriate depending on where the cursor will be located. Note that the program selects the appropriate position here. The quadrant snap point, that is the snap point as if an axis intersection. Even if the circle is drawn without an axis, note that this quadrant snap point always shows right where the axis passes through the circle. Deleting an element, that is selecting this element and either selecting the delete option under the right button or simply the delete key on the keyboard. From the different options that I'll be using, I'll show you alternately one by one the drawing and editing options. Now I will draw an offset for this axis, which is an option that is on either the home ribbon, the offset, or the edit ribbon. It's exactly the same option. When I enable this option, I have to enter the distance, that is the distance between these elements. Here it will be 25 units. I confirm with enter, and now the selection. Note that the program asks for the offset side. I can point to it on the left or on the right. I can also, as you can see in the command area here below, that I can select the letter B and say both sides. And the program will automatically select these 25 units on one side and the other. I'll go back to my rectangle for a moment and choose the rectangle that was drawn using the line option. I will select one element and say that it should be offset to the center by 25 units, because the program still remembers these settings for us. And now I have to modify each side separately. Now I'm going to do the same with this rectangle that was created as a polyline. Note that the whole thing is selected. If I do it inwards, see how the corners have been leveled. In this rectangle, I will have to remove these intersection lines unless I need them. If I were to go outside, the outline would be wider for this rectangle. But here, these lines would end up in exactly the same place, so I would have to lengthen them. So depending on what the elements will be used for later, you can choose different options. Of course, you can always explode a polyline. So under the right button, you can choose the explode option, and then it will become an individual element. So this will be a line now, and if it had a part of an arc, it will be an arc. If you want to have the option Edit Polyline on the Edit ribbon to combine polylines into one line, and it will also be defined as a polyline, not separate segments of your polygon. Now I will show you how to draw a circle in a slightly different way. You can choose it with this little triangle. For example, if we were talking about a circle with 2 points, then you can draw it right here. The best option would be to use 2 points. And depending on where you want to use the circle, you have a choice of different drawing methods. You can choose what is the most convenient and the necessary way for you at a given moment. Note that when you hover over some of the icons, some of them have videos that show you how to use this option. By clicking on the bubble, you will be transferred to YouTube onto the page with a video on how to enter a particular element. If you want to turn off these movie notifications, just click on the bubble with the question mark at the bottom of the bar. In addition to the circle, you have the possibility to draw circles such as ellipses, such as ellipses. Remember that when you draw anything, here at the cursor, there's always information about what the program expects from you now. That is, for example, here at 500 units. I confirm with enter, and I can enter half of the axis of the second arc. So let's say it's going to be 100. The ellipse is drawn. Ellipses can be entered either as ellipses or as polylines. Then you'll be able to edit them a little bit differently. That's the drawing settings, and that's where you can define that for yourself. Now we will discuss the introduction of arches. You can also introduce them in different ways. See, there are quite a lot of ways, and depending on your needs, you can choose the correct one for you. For example, a 3-point arc, that is simply the arc that will pass through these 3 points that you indicate, regardless of whether you have ortho on or not. And the arc is determined exactly by those points you entered. Just remember that if an element that you are drawing has to pass through a point, show it with a snap point, because you will never be able to zoom in on the drawing in such a way that you can exactly grab it. For example, the end of a line or a corner. Only the snap point gives you that possibility. Another way to draw an arc will be with the arc center start end option, which is the second option. Now I'll choose the center of this rectangle, so on this occasion I will show you another anchor point. I press Shift and the right mouse button, and I select mid between 2 point snap, so I will show you the center of my circle. And now, remembering that you draw in a counterclockwise direction, you indicate the starting point of the circle and the end point. And in this way, I could draw a circle on this radius. It will be similar in the case of an elliptical arc or a circle. There are several options for entering these elements, depending on your requirements. Now I will discuss the modification function for a moment. I will start with copying, which can also be done in different ways. The first one is that we select the element and choose the copy option from under the right button. Now it is very important what you want to do with this element and where to introduce it. If I click in this place, which is beyond any elements, please note that I am not able to precisely place the circle in any way. So if you're copying or moving anything, because moving is similar, the base point is very important. If I want the circle to be duplicated on the rectangles that have already been entered and to be introduced in exactly the same way, I can use either the center of this side or, for example, a corner. And then I copy exactly as it is entered here. If it needs to be copied to another place, please remember that the characteristic points later on give us opportunity to introduce the circle to a specific place. Now I will show you another example of copying. Select again, right-clicking, and then Copy Options. Now you can choose the displacement option you have here under the cursor in the angles brackets. And if you press the down arrow, you can choose the displacement and say how long this copy of yours should be, right or left, up or down. I would like it to be between these axes, so that there will be 650 units. So I enter 650 for X, then a comma, and then 0 for Y. And I do not enter anything in Z because everything is drawn on one plane. So I generally skip Z and finally confirm with Enter. And now to check the distance, I indicate a point, then the second point, and I have entered 650. To sum up, copying and moving is similar. Either you select an element and copy it, you simply move it, only then you move with a specific point or with a displacement. But then you select the displacement either in the command area or under the mouse cursor. I'm going to draw one more circle here, which will have a radius of, let's say, 100. And now I can draw more circles in the same way as this circle. But I can also use the offset option for that, which I have already showed here on the line and the rectangle. I choose only the distance, say 26 units, confirm, and show which way. So this offset can be both to a straight element and to circular arcs, to all elements that are in the program. When you edit an element, copy, offset, rotate, they always take over the properties of the element from which you are copying. I'm talking about properties like line thickness and belonging to layers. Now, if I would like these elements to be on the outline layer, I have to choose either here from the home ribbon or from the quick launch bar to which layer these elements should belong, and they change automatically. Remember, I talked about it in the previous presentation that if we set the properties of elements that we divide on layers, then we can very easily change them. If I were to define the properties of this line only in a line, I would not only have to transfer the other two lines to the layer, but I would also have to modify them in terms of the drawing method. Now let's take the trim option. It is an option that is very useful in the program. It is located on the home ribbon or on the edit, but on the edit ribbon you have it hidden a bit. I will select the element to be cut, because I will cut the line, so I mark the element to be cut, confirm with Enter, and show what should not be there. And now please note, the circle has cut these lines in two places. So this piece has been cut out, just in between. If I still want to get rid of the two pieces that are now marked, I just have to remove them. And in a similar way, I can remove these two lines from the second circle, from here. And now also remember that when you're selecting the circle and what should be cut, indicate it, click at the end with the right mouse button or Enter and exit the option. When it comes to cutting in this area, it is quite important what you choose to cut out. Please pay attention. If I want to cut this piece of the circle, I mark this line because it will cut this circle. I confirm it with Enter and show that it is not there. Now we'll take the Extend option. And we have the Trim option. These are options that work in a very similar way, and we often use them interchangeably. When I want to extend a line, I should of course choose the Extend option, but note that in this case, I know what I'm extending and to which line I'm extending. But the procedure is like this. First, select the place to which you are extending, confirm with Enter, and then select what you are extending. I know it sounds a bit backwards, but it's the best way to do it. I will undo it now to show you that I can do the same with the trim option. When you delete, you often select more than just one element, and it will save you time selecting the option every time. So I can mark more elements here, so these elements will be cut. I will approve, and now I can cut this piece of an element. It has been completely cut out. And here I just want to extend it. So I press the Shift key and show what it can extend to. Please remember that Shift is such a button that precisely when it comes to lengthening and shortening, it works interchangeably. But this Shift button also still works when we start drawing. If you draw and you do not have Ortho turned on, then if you press Shift, the Ortho turns on automatically. Now please note, if I have Ortho on and I turn on Shift, it won't work for a while. So remember, Shift is a special button that changes our options a little while drawing or editing, and it comes in handy very often, so I suggest using it. We are now going to move the drawing. I would like these elements to be more harmonious with each other, so as to round off the connection these circles here have. For this, I need the Fillet option. Here's quite an important thing. Sometimes I select an element under the right button, select its modification, and sometimes I enable the option to modify first and then select the element. It doesn't really matter what you choose first, whether we select an element and then choose the modification option or vice versa. I will show it interchangeably here. When I round something off, I turn on the Fillet option first and then show the element. But mostly I select the element first and then I choose the modification option with the right mouse button. Of course, you can also choose this option either from the Start ribbon or from the Edit ribbon, depending on what you need. If someone has such elements removed, for example, onto toolbars, then of course you can also activate them from there. We have the Fillet option activated, so we can define the radius of the rounding. Note that you cannot see the window next to the cursor, but on the command line you can already see that I have the settings. So I can either use the arrow or the letter S to enter the settings and define a radius of 40 units and confirm. And here I'm showing you the line and the circle. I'll repeat this operation. Now it is shown at the bottom that the radius is 40, so I don't have to enter these settings again. I approve and do the same on the other side. I could make one element and then choose the mirror option, but maybe I'll show you the mirror option on another example. Of course, you can also show Fillet. For example, straight elements and chamfer in the same way. Fillet and chamfer can be used depending on whether something is to be cut or rounded, but alternately you can use this option when, for example, you have to shorten elements. Here I have a situation where these lines intersect, and I would like to simply shorten. I can choose the trim option and show this element, and those elements that are to be cut, but this is rather painful. So rather I would choose, for example, chamfer. Please note at the bottom in the command area, I have information that on both sides 0 units are entered. So this cut will not be there. It means that it is just shown that these two elements and they're automatically cut to each other. So I do not have to enter the cut option several times and show these individual elements separately to be cut. So chamfer can cut corners and, for example, lengthen or shorten, as long as you have properly defined the settings. When you draw, a function that is frequently used is rotate. I select the elements that I want to modify. With the right button, I choose rotate. And now the pivot point is important. I'm turning off the ortho. I'm going to show in the middle of these circles just to demonstrate that the base point is very important. If I choose another point, it will be the center of rotation. And I would like this element here to be moved 30 degrees away. But I would also like this element that I marked to stay. The default is that when you rotate this element, that is the original element, as if you move it by some angle. If I now enter 30 and confirm with enter, this part of the drawing will rotate. I, on the other hand, would like this element to remain and, additionally, to have it reversed. So I have such a situation. Therefore, I have already indicated this base point. I choose the copy option. So either the letter C or click on copy. And also, if I enter 30, I have the original element and copy. I'll do the same thing when it comes to the bottom. I'll turn off only the elements with the Shift button that I duplicate and the arcs from the select elements. I'll also choose, let me just do this. I'll also choose the rotate option. Only this time it will be minus 60 degrees. So again, the letter C and then minus 60 degrees. That is, between this and this, I have an angle of 90 degrees. These elements overlap. I could use the overkill option for this, but I'm only going to remove this one element at this point to make it okay. Here these elements overlap. One is higher, the other one is lower. So select the cutting element and then the one that is hiding below it. If this element was to be duplicated several times at the same distances, I could use the array option. I'll show the array in another example. I will choose the rectangle option. I will make the rectangle a square, but it still won't make much difference. Note that when I click on the first point, I simply specify the size, width, and height of this rectangle. Here it will be square, which is 90 by 90. I'm going to make this symbol for a table with chairs. And now I'll draw another square. But first, I'll draw a rectangle 45 units by 40 units. Now I will change this piece into an arc and say that it is shifted by 5 units. So I will also have a 45 unit depth of this chair. I drew it, but it looks like it is in the center, but it's probably not in the middle. So I'm going to move it in the appropriate way. That is, I will choose the move option. I'll mark a characteristic point on the chair. I'll mark a characteristic point on the table. And now I want these points to center, so I'm using this polar tracking. Have a look here. It sometimes doesn't work out as you want it to, and it doesn't quite catch, but you can go do it a little bit differently. Put them together and then center it and then move them apart again. Now, in order to have 4 chairs around the table, all I have to do is mark this one. I choose polar array, so a circular array. The program asks me here at the cursor and here at the bottom also for the center of this array. So I mark the center of the table. And now the program offers me 6 elements from an array. And I will only want 4. By default, it goes every 90 degrees. So it is a full circle pattern, so 360 degrees. If after checking these elements, so in this case my chairs here, are to be 1 element, then you choose the array, the associative array. So mark this array. If not, then deselect it. And now one more thing. By default, these chairs turned the center of my table, which is how I wanted it. But it may also be that you would like them not to be turned in either direction. You have to choose the right option and improve with enter. Now I will show you a situation when you have 3 chairs on one side of the table. So I choose the rectangle, say 200 by 90. I will draw the chair, which will make 45 by 45. I want to modify it, so I will turn off the input at the cursor for the moment, thanks to which I'll grab this handle, move it to the center, not clicking, but selecting the direction, typing 5 units, and thus modifying my rectangle into a trapezoid. Now to copy 2 more elements. I choose a rectangular array. The program imposes something on us, but of course you can change it. Now the number of columns. These are the columns in my first element, which is the first column. So if I want 2 more, then I have to enter 3 columns in general. Now rows. This is my only row, so I'm typing 1. I do not need more. And one more very important thing, which direction these elements will be copied. If I have a value of 60 here, which is positive, the elements will go to the right. If I do minus 60, the elements will be to the left side. So remember that with the plus and minus, you define the columns, whether they should go to the right or the left. And also plus and minus determine whether the rows should go up or down. Now I would like to center them. That is, I will do similarly to the centering of the previous one. Of course, I can use auxiliary lines for this, or some other way of moving, but this is the easiest way for me, and I always use this option. And of course, it may be a little more difficult to show, but we'll do it similar to the previous way where I bring it down and then center it and then move it up again. Now I can copy my chairs and use the mirror option. Then the program asks me for a mirror line, which will be a line through the center of my table. And finally, in the command area down here, the program asks me whether to delete these primitives or not. I don't want them to be removed, so I choose the letter N or type it, and I have my table with 6 chairs. Now, either with the option of rotating or arraying by 90 degrees, depending on what's convenient, you can draw 2 chairs. But first, you have to break apart the array. After you've done that, I choose the rotate option because at the same time, I will show you the option Shift and the right mouse button, which is pulling out the list of snap points. I choose the middle one between the points because I want to be positioned exactly in the middle or between my inserted chairs. And now the points, but I forgot about the copy option. So this chair moved, but that's okay because I can always use the copy option in a very simple way. And as you can see, the same distance is measured. Now I'll use the mirror again. Another drawing element that I would like to show is the polygon. You can enter a polygon in various ways. I will choose the option of entering with a center vertex. The polygon can be a pentagon, square, or triangle. When I enable this option, please look at the bottom of the screen at the command bar. I should enter the number of sides. I select 6 sides and confirm with enter. Now I can show the center of my polygon. I'll turn on Ortho and enter 120 for the radius. And here on these elements, I would like to show the scaling option. If you are scaling something that consists of one element like a polyline, we only select that element. Here I have a lot of elements, a circle, and a lot of lines, so I select all of them. Please remember that from right to left selects everything, even what is selected with only a small piece of it. Everything that fits into your selection outline. And from left to right only selects what is entirely within the selected area. This is quite important, especially when there are already a lot of elements in the drawing. Now the scale option. I usually choose it from under the right mouse option. Now the important thing is which point will be the base point. If this one is to stay, it will stay in the same place, and everything around it will be enlarged or reduced. If I want it to be half of this element now, then I'll enter 0.5, remembering that I have to enter a period for sure. That is from this regular keyboard, because I will enter a comma if I use a numeric keyboard. Everything that is above 1 will be an enlargement of a given element, and below 1 will of course be a decrease in it. And here, take a moment to look at the command bar at the bottom of the screen. There's an option to copy an element, so you can copy the element first and then scale it. and you'll get two objects. On the frequently used elements, when it comes to the modification function, I still have stretch. Let me mark this part of the drawing. Note that I've only selected this part. I choose the option stretch here from the home ribbon. I could of course also call up this option from the right mouse button. Now note here, if I choose some points, I can distort this drawing. Cool. But I can of course also shorten or lengthen. I turn off ortho so that it does not interfere. Shortening and lengthening is mainly used for this, but of course, as you can see, I can also move it a bit differently. What I have marked, that is, these points are attached to the element that is being modified. In turn, the beginnings of the lines that I have marked are permanent elements. These elements will not move. So now I can either type or pick the point where this element will be shortened. And those lines that were only marked partially, so the line of the axis and these two contours, will simply be shortened, and all the others of the same size were simply moved in the indicated direction. I still have a fairly important clone option, but maybe I will do it in such a way that I will now move to layer 0. And here I'll introduce a circle, some arc. You can see that I'm on a different layer than the axis or my circle. And now I would like to copy all this information about the layer and settings of a given line. I do not copy an element because when I copy an element, it includes its length. I want to clone it because I want to enter the same element but with a different angle and length. So I mark such an element, I choose the clone option, and now note that I can draw a line and it will be exactly on the same layer as these axes, but it may be at a different angle and may have a different length. Similarly, you can clone elements from other layers, so you can copy all properties of a given element and insert this element with these properties, bigger or smaller, depending on your needs. Finally, I would like to show you one more element to be introduced. It will be on the home ribbon, here under the small triangle, and on the draw option. This is the point. This point on the screen, depending on what you need, can be a dot, a circle, a cross with a circle, any symbol that you will define for yourself, which can mark characteristic places, for example, on maps or in other documentation. You insert a point by selecting or by entering coordinates, depending on your need. Only, as I mentioned at the beginning, the symbol depends on the user. By default, it is just a point, so 1 pixel by 1 pixel. And if you want to modify it, because it's maybe a bit hard to see, have a look. It is here now. This whole table allows you to modify it in any way that you want to. You can do this in the drawing settings. You can enter the drawing settings window from the tools ribbon, or it is here, or on the status bar at the very bottom of the screen. This is where the coordinates are given. Double-clicking opens the drawing settings dialog. And if you go to the Entity Creation tab and Points here, you have the option to define a different symbol for your point. For example, it can be a cross. I'll now click on OK to show you what it will look like, but I would like to come back to this window for a moment. This window will also appear if you entered the settings here on the status bar, in the grid settings, or I was here in this window for a while when the angles were set for the tracking options. So these settings can define both the elements when drawing, just like right here with the points. They can show what they look like. With ellipses, if you will enter the ellipses as ellipses or as polylines. Just remember that this change will only take effect when this option is checked. While all previous elements such as ellipses will remain in the state they were in before the change, and they will not be modified. In the entity modification options, the mirror option is quite important here. You have already seen this window when I entered the fillet radius, but here in the upper part there is the definition primarily for the mirror, where you can define, for example, whether text will be legibly reflected or the reflection will be mirrored. So here in this window you will be able to define this. As a reminder, it's on the Tools ribbon, right here in the center, or right here where we have the coordinate information in the status bar. Double-clicking is a quick entry to this window. or, of course, the right mouse button on any of the settings. You always go to the settings of this window, only on different tabs. That will be all for today. I'd like to invite you all to the next webinar, in which I will discuss hatching, creating blocks, reading blocks for the project that were used, as well as the next ones, reading DWG files, so XREF files, and of course rasters. That is, for example, TIFF or even PDF formats, so lots of useful information. So I invite you to do that. If you have any questions at this time, please leave them under the film in the comments section, or even email them to us, which we'll get back to you when we can. Take care. Goodbye.